just hearing people who've been rangers living up in, in Denali for 30 years, talking about their experiences with the wildlife there. I mean, those were some of the interviews where I cried and the participants didn't cry just because I was so moved by the descriptions of the place.
Hello, I'm Emmy DeGrappa. Each week, we bring you stories asking our guests the question, why? We learn about their passion, why they do what they do, why should we care, and what can we learn? What better place to explore the human landscape than from the state known for its incredible landscapes, Wyoming? And what better organization than Wyoming Humanities? Serving our state for over 45 years, we share stories, ideas, and wisdom about the human experience. This is What's Your Why? Today, we are talking to Jacqueline Van Meter. She is a mobile tour site manager for StoryCorps. Their mission is to preserve and share humanities stories in order to build connections between people and create a more just and compassionate world. Welcome, Jacqueline.
Thank you for having me.
How did you get involved with StoryCorps and the mobile tour explicitly?
Well, it's a bit of a story, but the way that it all started, well, I was obviously a fan, like so many people who work at StoryCorps, and had been listening for years on NPR. I always had a general love of audio, but I didn't really incorporate it into my professional life until I was, a couple of years into my 30s. I had a background in marketing, and then I taught ESL in Buenos Aires, Argentina, for 3.5 years. And when I decided to come back to the States after that adventure, I thought it would be really interesting to move into the audio storytelling space. And of course, it was just blowing up in the wake of really successful podcasts like Serial and other kind of series like that. And so I did a little studying of audio production in Buenos Aires. And when I came back to the States and essentially crashed at my family's house in the Atlanta area, lo and behold, StoryCorps has a story booth, which is a brick and mortar operation, which is open to the public for folks in the Atlanta community to come in and record. And they were looking for someone who could speak English and Spanish, who was comfortable with audio recording equipment, and was comfortable, sort of working with different kinds of communities, and most importantly, could move into a space and invite two people to sit down and have a conversation and feel comfortable. And I think my experiences teaching English as a second language to adults really, it just really tied into that work, because I'm so used to sort of inviting people to find their voice and find ways to communicate and get excited about sharing things in another language. And so it really translated. So I got my start in the story booth in Atlanta. I was working very part-time. About 6 months after that, I joined their full-time facilitator team in Brooklyn, in the headquarters where StoryCorps is based. I did a year of working as a full-time facilitator, supporting kind of special projects, either through grant-funded initiatives or some paid partnerships, doing recordings on site all over the country. And then after a year of doing that, decided that I just had a real appetite for being on the road. There's one position at all of StoryCorps, which is full-time on the road, and that is the site manager position of the mobile tour. The mobile tour, of course, travels to 10 cities over the course of 1 year, and the manager is with that Airstream trailer full-time, working with the community and working with partners in that community to bring in people to record. So it seemed like the job for me, and I started in April of 2018 in that position. So this is my second stop on the tour, and it's been everything I hoped it would have been.
Are people generally familiar with how StoryCorps works, what the van does, how you show up, and how people have a conversation? Or is there some kind of training that has to happen before?
I think it really varies depending on the community. NPR has deep penetration in some places and not so much in others, but it's a real priority for us as an organization to go to all of those places, to really document and be able to archive stories of people from all over the country. And so, there's a learning curve for some folks, and for other folks, I've been listening for years, and, my friend recorded and so forth. So there is, it's part of our job to feel out the community and to be ready on the fly, sort of ahead of time, and also in that booth to really orient people to what the experience is like, what they what they can expect from us, what they could potentially expect from each other, and how a conversation in the booth might differ from a regular conversation. I think even people who are familiar with the model of StoryCorps and know that, it can bring out tears when you're listening can be surprised by the experience in the booth, because it is very intimate and you find yourself sharing things that, maybe the person that you are sitting across from and have known for 20 years, you've never quite told them in that way. And so seeing how the experience can be different and more enriching than people expect, even if they are big fans, is one of the real highlights of the work, I think.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And can you remember, just off the top of your head, maybe one of the most impactful stories that you've heard told in your experience, or are there just too many?
Oh, man. That's, what I've discovered. I joined the mobile tour in 2018, and the Airstream trailer, the team that works on that trailer, by far drives the real volume of our interview collection. We have other teams, the story booths, of course, and the national team that I was on before in Brooklyn, that do a lot of recording. But the mobile booth, we're set up, over the course of 4.5 weeks, recording 7 interviews 5 days a week. Well, 6 on Sundays. And so it's just a tremendous amount of stories. So I have to say that as a caveat. We're just saturated with people's stories. And so I think for the mobile team, it's a little bit harder to even put your finger on what the memorable one was, because there are so many. And these conversations are always so, not always, but more often than not, like really rich and really dense. For me personally, though, so many stories come to mind. I love the outdoors, and so I remember a story that we recorded prior to me being on the mobile booth. We did a partnership when I was on the national team with Denali National Park for their 100th anniversary, and just hearing people who'd been rangers living up in Denali for 30 years. Talking about their experiences with the wildlife there. Those were some of the interviews where I cried and the participants didn't cry, just because I was so moved by the descriptions of the place. But then there are other things too. I remember recording a mother and son in Atlanta talking about her father, his grandfather, who'd passed a couple of years before. And I won't go in, it's a bit of a long story to go into the details. They'd come in to record, and our production team, we recommended, a previous facilitator heard it, recommended it to production and said, there's something really special about these two, and they've got some interesting stories. You might want to bring them back and get them to tell a few more, and then maybe we can make it a cut for NPR. And so when they brought the participants back, I was there to record with them. And what really stood out to me, one, they were just incredible. They told really beautiful stories. Her father had been a police officer in Newark in the late 60s, specifically during the riots in Newark. And there was some real tension with race relations there, which is, a subject that's like as relevant and resonant today as it was then. And they conjured up so many memories of him. And the grandson, who was maybe 18 or 19, had these really, really great reminiscences of his grandfather, and told the story of how he'd, put on his Timberland boots because it made him seem taller every time he saw his grandfather, because he wanted his grandfather to see that he was growing up into a man. And afterwards, I emailed a little bit with his mother, and she told me that he had been experiencing some racism at school, and it was going through kind of a difficult time. And the opportunity, sort of unprompted by her, to sit down and recall the memory of his grandfather and the advice that he gave him, and just the example that he set. She said, even when they walked back out into the parking lot to go back to the car after recording, he was walking a little taller and just seemed a little bit, I don't know, the energy around him shifted because he was able to have that conversation. So it's things like that, things that I don't even know are going on in the booth, the context of people's lives, that just make, I don't know, when you find these things out later, the stories, that one was just like in my heart forever.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you find that's really easy, or do people freeze up, or how do they get that conversation going? Or do you help them feel comfortable and prompt them in any way?
Oh, yeah. And of course, it's so different for everybody, sometimes a lot of people say I'm a little nervous. They get in there and it's like, oh, I'm sitting in front of a microphone. This feels formal. They have this reference point of NPR, so they think that they're supposed to sound like some professional on the radio. And that's really not the idea at all. What you hear on NPR is so, it's authentic, but it's heavily edited so we can get, this really pure story down into 2 minutes. But the actual conversation itself, we really try to encourage participants when they step into the booth to just relax, be authentic. The space is for them to use however they want, and they can talk about, my colleague Madison always jokes, like, talk about your favorite ice cream flavor, whatever works. I usually encourage folks to not necessarily start out with the how do you want to be remembered question, because you need to ease into the conversation. So usually a little bit about, tell me about the time that you guys first met, or, what was your first memory of me? Those stories are vivid, but they're easy to answer usually, and that gets people going, and then they can kind of transition into some of our other bigger questions, like what's your biggest regret, or what are you most proud of? But of course, people can talk about whatever they want in StoryCorps. They really can. We have these suggested questions to help people, if they're inclined to, really maximize the opportunity to say what they want to say and maybe reflect a little more than they would in a casual conversation, with their cell phone and their coffee in their hand. But, ultimately, our goal is really just to give people the opportunity to really listen to one another, to honor each other by asking questions of the people in their lives. And so when we're in the room, we try to set that tone of, respect, of gratitude, of just listening, and occasionally ask a question or two to help them along if they want it. But ultimately, there's really no right or wrong way to record a story.
So when you're in New York and you're basically flying at 30,000 feet and going into these communities, how do you know that you're making an impact, or what's left behind? And is there something left behind? Or is it that they can go online to StoryCorps.org, I think it is. Can they find their story? Can they go listen to their interview that they had? What happens next?
That's such a great question. So in a very practical sense, anyone who participates in a StoryCorps recording receives a copy of their recording, with our high-quality microphones. They get an MP3 delivered to them by our recording and archiving team about 2 to 4 weeks after they record. In addition to that, participants, if they choose, at the end of their interview can give us permission to archive that conversation in the Library of Congress. And so it's preserved for posterity, and anyone in the future can go to the Library of Congress, to the American Folklife Center, and say, for example, I'd love to hear stories about Jackson Hole in 2018, or I'd love to hear stories of ranching or the rodeo. And an archivist will do a search and give them the search results, and they can listen to those stories on site at the Library of Congress. And this is an archive that we built out over the last, it's been about 15 years now, and that will live on. So people get so excited about the broadcast because, of course, that's how they know us. But really, the legacy that StoryCorps is leaving is this incredible archive of oral histories from people across the United States. To date, we have over 76,000 conversations archived through these sort of signature recordings, we call them, whether it's in the mobile booth or the story booths or through the national team. But then, of course, we introduced the mobile app, I think in 2015, 2016, and, another 150,000 conversations have been recorded through that app. It's of course, not as sort of guided an experience, with the signature interviews, as we sort of refer to them internally. There's a facilitator there to sort of create the space. But we've really started to dedicate more resources and thinking to how we can not only train folks and community organizations in the places that we visit on how to use the app, but thinking not just technically of what buttons do I push, but how can I recreate the situation that we try to create in the booth, of that intentional space for that intentional conversation, and training folks on how would you want to continue doing the recording in this community after we've left. Was it about documenting the work of your community organization or documenting the stories of this town? Is it about fostering intentional conversation just within your organization, and the recording gives you that sort of formal context to foster those conversations? There are a lot of different ways that you can think about why a StoryCorps conversation experience can be valuable. And so we're really focusing our efforts right now on mobile in particular, since we are only here for, 4 or 5 weeks and then we've got to go. How can we not only provide people the experience to record, but then also the tools and the perspective on how to keep that work alive so that, organizations and individuals can continue to get value from the experience of sitting down and recording these conversations.
Do you think that's the future of StoryCorps, is the mobile app, or do you think that going from site to site is as valuable, having that in-person connection?
I think the app is an important part of where we're headed, but it will certainly never replace the work that facilitators do on the ground of creating those spaces and being able to talk about the mission of StoryCorps to folks. We can put the app out there and we can provide all the language and video tutorials and everything, but I think having people on the ground, not only to sort of share the message, but to be in the space with these people and to learn what it is that people get out of the experience is so important to the way that we identify ourselves as an organization and the way that we continue to evolve how we think about ourselves and the value and the impact that we can have. We can't do that work without continuing to work with participants face-to-face and communities face-to-face, and understanding that every community is different, every organization within a community is different. Everybody's going to find something unique and specific and particular to what they're trying to do, and we need to be in contact and in community with those folks in order to continue doing the work that we want to do in the most meaningful way that we can.
So besides StoryCorps, what do you see in your future, either with or without StoryCorps?
Thank you. What a great question. I've always been a bit of a wanderluster. I've lived in a lot of different places, and this job feels so right to me for so many reasons. I mean, I love working directly with people. I love encouraging people to dialogue and really listen to each other, and just recognizing the beauty that is in everybody's stories and what we can learn from one another. That's just something that's always kind of guided my heart my whole life. So being able to do this work now and travel the country, in some ways, it's really enriching for me, but it's also, having lived abroad for a number of years and coming back, I'm in love with every city in this country, and having this opportunity to sort of tour around and decide where my tribe might be has been incredible, and will, I'm sure, continue to be incredible over the next year. One thing that I'm super interested in is the idea of place-based storytelling and how we can map stories onto our experience of places, like audio tours and thinking about ways that storytelling can connect people more to their own community and to the places where they live, and what is the relationship there. And in particular, I being out west and being in Colorado and Jackson, there's so many lessons I've already learned being on the road about the relationship people have to the land and how important that is. And it's so easy if you live in a suburban area or an urban area to sort of lose sight of that. And so I'd love, after my work on the mobile tour is done, to continue to do work in storytelling, and but to find ways to connect people to place, and particularly to hopefully inspire a little bit more of a conservation lens for folks who maybe don't interact with the outdoors every day.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's been incredible.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us for this episode of What's Your Why, a production of Think Why, Wyoming Humanities. This has been executive producer Emmy DeGrappa. Please subscribe and never miss a show. For more information, go to thinkwhy.org.